Welcome back to Sustainability Street, our podcast on the intersection of commercial real estate and the world we live in. I'm your host, Therese Fitzgerald. It's crunch time for New York City property owners subject to Local Law 97. By May 1st, affected owners were required to submit their first compliance reports under the sweeping emissions cap legislation. Those who didn't are taking advantage of a 60-day grace period, and they may request an extension if they're showing a good faith effort. But it's the more stringent 2030 deadlines that owners really need to start planning for. For this episode, my guest is Amanda Clevinger, Policy and Programs Director for Bright Power. As the experts on local and state building performance standards, Clevinger's team helps Bright Power's engineers, consultants, and clients develop compliance strategies, and the team works with policymakers to help address the barriers preventing decarbonization. In fact, when the city set about devising Local Law 97, and later when it formed the actual rules, Bright Power was one of the private sector firms consulted, and Clevinger has participated in some of those discussions. During our conversation, Clevinger and I talked about how the sweeping emissions legislation has impacted the city so far, and the challenges of funding the transition to high energy efficiency and electrification that will get the city to its 2030 and 2050 reduction goals. And we touched on how property owners in cities not currently mandating building performance standards can start preparing for what is likely to come to their markets in the future. I think you'll really enjoy our conversation. Hi, Amanda. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
So before we start talking about Local Law 97, let's talk a little bit about what Bright Power does for people who may not know.
So Bright Power just turned 20 years old a few months ago, so we had a little birthday party. That was fun. And we're based in New York City, and we are working to provide a really holistic set of solutions for building owners and managers to help them reduce their emissions, reduce operational costs, and also improve the tenant experience at their buildings. And our services include things like energy audits, retrofit consulting, high performance certification support like Passive House, LEED, Enterprise Green Communities. We also provide some solar and procurement consulting. We have a proprietary benchmarking platform called Energy Scorecards. So we are really trying to provide a one-stop shop approach for all energy-related services. And we serve a mix of both multifamily and commercial properties right now. But I'd say we're best known for our work on the multifamily side. And that includes properties like regulated affordable housing, condos and co-ops, and also some luxury market rate properties too.
And what is your role at Bright Power?
So I am Bright Power's Policy and Programs Director. So I lead a mighty team of 3 that works within both Bright Power's internal teams and also works with Bright Power's real estate clients to help them do a couple of key things. So the first key piece of our team's role is to consult on, there are all kinds of new laws, particularly at the local and state level, that are requiring buildings to do efficiency and electrification work. And so our team leads a lot of that research and consulting with our clients to help get them ready for that. And then finally, our team works with policymakers to help address the many, many, many barriers that are currently getting in the way of decarbonizing our buildings. And so I definitely think most engineering and energy consulting shops that I've seen don't have a function like this. And it's been really valuable though, because as we all know and are all experiencing, like policy is such a key factor in doing this work. And so we've been able to provide some really critical support.
So were you involved in the formation of Local Law 97 and the rulemaking? I know a lot of the committees drew from the private sector.
Yeah, Local Law 97 was passed back in 2019. And so at that point, Bright Power was involved in the creation of the law. Our chief of strategy and founder, Jeff Perlman, participated in some of the original hearings as they were playing out in the New York City Council. And then a few years later, when I took over the work as the policy team lead, I have since participated in rulemakings and numerous working groups with the Department of Buildings or the DOB to help flesh out how the law will actually be implemented.
Oh, cool. So let's talk about Local Law 97. I think even if you are not based in New York City, you're watching this law because it's so sweeping, impacts a lot of investors. And I think it's sort of like a bellwether of what could be coming to your neighborhood. Tell us how impactful the law has been to date and what's happening right now.
Yeah, it's been so impactful, is all anyone's talking about in New York right now, which is really exciting to watch it develop and get to this point. I'll tell you folks a little bit about what it is for those who are less familiar with it. So 97 is what we call a building performance standard, which sets individual emissions performance limits for large buildings in New York. And so those emissions limits are customized to each building that's based on its size. And every 5 years, the emissions limits get harder to hit. So the limits will drop to zero in 2050 because the law is designed to push buildings to zero emissions by that point. So it's really aggressive. And I think a lot of people forget that point when they're thinking about the immediate requirements of compliance, which we can talk about. The long-term goal is to get buildings to zero. And so it's definitely really ambitious, some of the most ambitious legislation we've seen. And so starting this year, only a small portion of properties will face fines, but by 2030, roughly 75% of properties will be facing fines under the law. And so the impact is going to be major, like you were talking about, Therese. REBNY estimated that for 2030, the real estate industry will be facing just under $1 billion of fines starting in 2030 every year if they don't take action to reduce carbon emissions at their properties. So this is truly unprecedented in its size and its scale and its impact. And we're seeing in every corner of the real estate industry here in New York, everyone is talking about this. So it's really
Yeah.
exciting.
I've seen some stats where currently probably about 80 or 90% of buildings are within their caps, but that's going to change, of course.
Yeah. And that's the point that I was making, that the original design of the law created this structure where the majority of buildings, to your point, are not going to face fines immediately for the reporting that starts this summer.
Mm-hmm.
The majority of buildings will start to face fines come 2030. So that's really the year that's going to matter in terms of getting buildings to, in addition to reporting their emissions every year, actually taking action to make changes and upgrades to their buildings as well.
Okay. So this is kind of a crunch time. May 1 was an important deadline, and now there's a grace period. Tell us
Yeah.
about that.
Exactly. So the original deadline for the first reporting year for Local Law 97 was May 1st. That has been extended. So the deadline is now June 30th with the grace period that they are allowing properties to take. In addition to that, most properties will also have the option to extend to August 29th, but you have to request that extension. So most of the clients that Bright Power is working with will be submitting August 29th. That's coming up very soon.
Yeah.
We are in progress, getting started with building out our infrastructure for the reporting and getting that over to the DOB. So we are moving. It's been stressful, but exciting.
Yeah. So owners can receive an electrification credit for installing high efficiency equipment in their buildings before 2030. What are some of the upgrades that you see owners undertaking?
Beneficial electrification is cool because the city officials are realizing that we need buildings to start electrifying before 2030 because, as we were talking about, a lot of buildings are not going to face serious fines until 2030 or 2035. And that's the point when they're going to start thinking about what efficiency or electrification makes sense of their buildings. But we want to create ways for building owners to be rewarded for moving early. And so that's where this beneficial electrification credit comes from. And so I would say at this point, there are not a lot of properties that are starting to leverage that yet. I think we need to get through the first year of emissions reporting, and then we're going to see more of that focus of pushing buildings to take firmer actions to upgrade their buildings, and beneficial electrification credits will be part of that discussion because it does provide a pretty lucrative reward for electrifying early. And this particular credit is cool because particularly for buildings where maybe a full electrification project doesn't make sense, but a partial electrification project would, that's where we really think the beneficial electrification credit will make sense and will be most lucrative is for those types of properties that are looking at maybe a partial project in the next few years and getting some extra reward from it.
And that's a credit toward their current emissions or for 2030?
So it's a credit that can be applied in future years. And so it will be really useful potentially out through 2035. And so that's one of the things that we're going to see owners doing is looking at whether or not it makes sense to do a qualifying electrification project for that credit, and then looking at could they save the credit value to then use in a future year. And that I think could be pretty lucrative for a lot of people.
And how about purchasing RECs as a pathway? I know there was a lot of discussion about that and some issues with that. Is that still
Yeah,
out there?
it's a hot topic in the city council. And so the law does allow you to purchase RECs. The challenge, however, is that there are not a lot of RECs currently available that are eligible under the rules for local law 97 specific RECs. Most of the RECs that will be available are not going to become available for purchase until closer to 2027. And right now, there's not a lot available. So it's not a strategy that we have seen a lot of owners using because there's just not a lot of RECs available for purchase. The other challenge, particularly for the multifamily sector, is that RECs currently can only be used to offset emissions that come from electricity. So, for example, if you have a multifamily building that has a big fat boiler in the basement that's burning gas or oil, purchasing RECs is not going to help you very much. And so the REC conversation is more applicable right now to commercial buildings than it will be for multifamily.
Yeah. So what about those older buildings that have the big fat boiler in the basement and replacing it? It's hard to justify financially.
Yeah, it's a challenging conversation. And so I think both in New York and also nationally too, there are specific things that owners and managers should absolutely be thinking about when you are asking these questions about, does it make sense to upgrade to a new boiler, but a super efficient one, or decide to electrify your space heating? And there's a lot of different factors that properties should consider when they are thinking about these decisions, right? Like, when is your existing equipment due to be replaced? When is your building getting refinanced? What incentives are available to you? What compliance requirements are you subject to, like local law 97? How much does electrification cost for your building? And so one of the things that you can do to answer a lot of those questions is to get a quality energy audit or electrification feasibility study, like the ones that Bright Power offers or from
Mhm.
other providers as well, because we can answer a lot of those key questions in a study like that. Because a lot of people think that you have to electrify everything tomorrow when they hear about laws like local law 97, but the reality is that that's not true in most cases, that there are different strategies that you can consider depending on those different factors that I just talked about. And you can ask the question of, does it make sense to pursue some type of partial or hybrid electrification strategy first rather than trying to do a full electrification project? Does it make sense to look at a phased electrification strategy where maybe you start with like one tower of your apartment building now and start with the second tower of your apartment building 5 to 10 years from now? The types of studies that I'm talking about can help you look at all of those different things because the pathway to decarbonizing these buildings is going to look different for everyone. So for some buildings, upgrading to a more efficient boiler will make sense based on those factors. For other buildings, it won't. And so that's something that a quality provider can help people understand and tease out.
Yeah, there's talk of, well, it's easier to just pay the fine. How does the law keep people from doing that?
So I think there's some pieces to keep in mind there. one of the first pieces that people need to understand, particularly in the New York context, when they talk about maybe it's easier to just pay the fine, is that New York does not really consider paying the fine as a compliance pathway. There are other jurisdictions that have similar laws where you can sort of choose to pay the fine and they will essentially consider you in compliance. But in New York, you're actually considered out of compliance if you're paying fines. So that's the first part to consider. The second piece is that I don't think in the majority of cases they really have to use that strategy, right? Because as we were saying earlier, most buildings, 15 to 25% are the ones that are actually going to be facing fines this year.
Right.
The majority are not going to be facing fines until later on. And even for the properties that are facing fines in 2030, most of those will not have to consider electrification at that point. A lot of them will be able to get into compliance with lower cost, better payback measures like pipe insulation, upgrading your lighting, looking at different measures like that, looking at orifice plates, lighting controls, putting better controls on your pumps and your other motors, TRVs. There's a lot of different things that you can look at that are not crazy expensive that will both potentially get you into compliance in the short term and also have legitimate benefits to the building as well in terms of operational cost and improved tenant comfort, particularly in a multifamily scenario where maybe they have one or two pipe steam radiators and not great control over anything.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of benefit to that, in addition to potentially getting you into compliance in the short term.
I think that's reassuring for people. There seems to be some panic still, particularly among like the co-ops and condos.
Yeah, and we work with a lot of the co-ops and condos, and I will definitely say that they present challenges even before you talk about local law 97, just because we have lay volunteer people who are managing what can be pretty complex buildings, have like your dentist and a teacher and a retired firefighter who are managing equipment in these buildings that is just as complex as what you would see in a commercial building in a lot of
Yeah.
cases. And so that has always been an extra challenge for them of learning the basics of how their equipment works so that then we can have the more complex conversations about what to do for local law 97. So I absolutely understand the anxiety because this is intimidating. This 97 is intimidating even for the most experienced high-end owners and managers. So it absolutely is going to cause anxiety for the condo and co-op board representatives as well, and we totally get that. And that's part of what we try to do is provide a really supportive approach for them to help make sure that they're good on the basics before we try to add in some of the 97 discussion. And we have seen that there are a small handful of those condo and co-op properties, particularly the larger garden style properties that are in the outer boroughs. So in the Bronx, out in Queens, out in Brooklyn, where there are a few of those that are facing circumstances that are a little bit more severe than the typical building in New York City for local law 97. And so we're working with them to help find some solutions to help be able to upgrade those properties and not affect the affordability of the people who are living there, right? Because that is a concern for particularly seniors who are on fixed incomes, who can't afford a huge assessment on the building related to upgrades for 97. And so I think it's a smaller proportion than what people in the media have been talking about and conversations at city council have indicated. And so I think it's about making sure that for the buildings where they can get to 2030 relatively easily, that we make that very clear to them and help them get there. And then for the remaining few that are facing pretty severe fines starting this year, that's where we have to work with city council to find better solutions to offer them flexibility, because some of them do need it. And so I think that there are solutions that could be had, and those are conversations that are ongoing to find the right way to offer them that flexibility without sort of opening a big loophole that I don't think is really needed. And so, yeah, it's hard to have conversations about things that can be very political issues.
Yeah.
But that's what the Bright Power approach is, to try and say, we're coming in from a pragmatic approach and telling policymakers about what we're seeing on the ground so that we can offer a more nuanced opinion in these conversations about how we make the law better and more effective for the buildings and the people that it affects.
After a short break, how is New York City going to fund its massive decarbonization project?
Hello, this is Jessica Pure, Editor-in-Chief with Commercial Property Executive. I just wanted to make sure you know that entries for the 2025 CPE Influence Awards are now open. We're ready to hear all about your most noteworthy properties, projects, and transactions. Does your office have unique design elements that attract tenants? Are you the top broker in your firm? Were you able to successfully reposition a property? We want to celebrate your successes. Email me at jessica.fiur@cpe-mhn.com and I'll guide you through the entire process. The entries are due June 20th, so you have plenty of time. Thank you.
So, Amanda, I was at an NYU sustainability conference recently, and the question was put to a panel: is the city going to meet its 2030 and 2050 goals? And someone on the housing side said, affordability is going to make or break this.
Absolutely. No. And we agree. And that's part of some of the other advocacy work that our policy team has been involved in is how do we solve the other pieces of affordability? Because one of the long-term challenges that we're going to be facing with Local Law 97 is how do we fund this work, right? For 2030, where we're just doing, in most cases, some cheaper, quicker payback measures, that there are some good existing incentive programs from the utilities and also from our state agency called NYSERDA.
Mhm.
I think we're going to be okay. But beyond that, electrification can be expensive, both in terms of the upfront capital costs and also the operational costs.
Mhm.
And right now, we don't have the type of funding that we will need to be able to do electrification at scale. There are 50,000 buildings in New York that are subject to 97, and electrification projects can often cost the multi-millions of dollars. And so this is a really big question that we are working with local and state regulators and legislators to bring attention to. And we're starting to see some movement. There are a couple of different bills that are in front of the state legislature that could potentially provide some more capital for these types of projects.
Mhm.
We also are participating in conversations about a new type of financing program that the city and state might roll out to help with this as well. And so we need all of that, all of the above, because
Right.
affordability is such a huge issue. And I think one of the areas where we have not seen as much activity, where I would like to see more research on, is the operational cost piece, right? Because we know right now that one of the barriers to pushing buildings to electrify is the uncertainty about how much your electricity bill is going to cost. In cases, for example, where buildings are currently burning oil, that's a use case where the economics already make sense for the operational cost. But for a lot of the buildings that are burning gas, it's a little bit more of an open question. And so we need more research on that. We also need to figure out what types of subsidies or other strategies can we use to support buildings as they are switching to electric heat pumps. And if their bills do temporarily go up, how do we support that? Because we are already facing a deep affordability crisis, both in terms of the affordability of our housing and also the affordability of our utilities, right? We cannot afford to be increasing costs any more
Yeah.
than they already are. And so those are all intersectional challenges that we are also working on simultaneously to make sure that as buildings are complying with Local Law 97 and taking those steps, that they are not facing these affordability challenges on the other side of those retrofit projects.
Speaking of incentives, is there anything in the Inflation Reduction Act that could help owners electrify?
Yes, so there's a plethora of tax credits, deductions, grant programs, loan programs. There are so many different programs and subsidies that could be helpful for building owners and managers that are trying to do these projects. Right now, with the politics, it's going to be
Mhm.
challenging. in terms of what the future of those programs will be. And so that's definitely going to create even more challenges and create more barriers for buildings that are trying to decarbonize, because a lot of states are not in New York's position in terms of being able to commit several $billions of subsidy to these types of projects. Most cities, states, and counties are going to be relying on the federal subsidies as a key source of funding to help get these projects done. And so if we lose that funding, it will be detrimental to the industry, and we will have to come up with a lot more creative ways to potentially be able to fund this type of work. But I think we'll be able to adapt. Like I was saying, there are some innovative financing programs that the city and state are working on that I think other jurisdictions could potentially copy, that will help to address some of these issues. And so we'll just need more of that, more
Yeah.
collaboration between, the different jurisdictions across the country that are doing this to figure it out, because losing the federal dollars will definitely be detrimental to the work that we're trying to do.
Yeah. I think they're talking about shortening the duration of the incentives. So maybe the city and state can get some before it runs out. One of the compliance challenges is that commercial owners and multifamily owners don't directly control their tenants' usage. What are some of the strategies that you see owners developing to kind of get over that split incentive, as they call it?
Yes, this is a very critical problem, and it's a problem for both commercial owners and also multifamily owners. And so we're seeing some progress on the commercial side, specifically through the use of tools like green leases to help create better collaboration between owners and tenants, because historically there was none. And when
Mm-hmm.
Local Law 97 was passed, there was a lot of criticism for this specific point, making owners and managers responsible for the performance of the whole building when most of their leases did not include any protections in terms of a particular tenant. If they have a data center, for example, in that tenant space, being able to allocate fines from Local Law 97 to that specific tenant. Or, even in the case if you have, for example, like a senior housing facility where, you have my grandma living there who has the heat on at 95
Right, right.
degrees all year round, right? There's no protections in the law right now for cases like that, but we are seeing some really interesting tools arise to address this. And so one of those things, like I was saying, is a green lease, where you can set up in advance when you're doing the leasing process what the expectations are as relates to compliance and other regulations like Local Law 97, and can potentially give owners the ability to allocate fines to tenants who are driving up the fines for everyone. And so I think that's great. You can get more information about that from IMT, the Institute for Market Transformation. They have some great resources on their website about green leasing. I think the harder problem to solve is on the multifamily side, because there are not currently green leasing tools that you can use for residential leases. I think some of this is going to come down to putting more effort into communicating and educating your residents, which is also something more broadly that needs to happen as we electrify more of our buildings, of educating tenants about what's going on and how to use their new equipment. I think one of the other pieces that we can be educating residents about is Local Law 97, right? And coming up with like a quick flyer of what can you do to help your building comply with this, right? Like turn the lights off when you leave your apartment, easy things like that residents can do to feel like they are contributing to the sustainability of their building. And one of the things that has also been helping in recent years in New York are the energy grades. And so the grades actually came out a few years ago and are slightly different metric than the way that Local Law 97 fines are calculated, but there's these grades on buildings that look like health code grades that are displayed in the front window that will give you an indication of how well the building is performing on energy efficiency. And so I've had so many random people in my life who don't work in this industry say, hey, what is this grade on my building? Like, what does it mean? And so people engaging about conversations on energy efficiency, on electrification, who know absolutely nothing about it, who are now really interested in it just from seeing those grades. And so I think that we can create ways to make Local Law 97 compliance publicly available so that we can have similar conversations on that front as well.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of cool with the
Yeah.
grades, because people always look for grades on restaurants.
Mhm.
AI is impacting every aspect of commercial real estate. How have you seen it improve energy efficiency for New York City owners?
That's an interesting question. So it definitely will be very exciting to see the effect of AI, particularly on some of the smart building technology that's out there in
Mhm.
terms of helping owners and managers better monitor what's going on in their buildings. And so right now that includes things like monitoring the meters in the building, monitoring the boiler in the basement, right? So similar to like a BMS, I think AI will be able to take some of the existing smart building tech that we have and really amp it up and
Mhm.
make it more useful. And so I'm excited to see where that goes because we definitely need more data and better quality data on what's going on in our buildings that will make 97 compliance easier and also make it easier, per the previous question that we were talking about, will also make it easier for owners to have more granular conversations with tenants about their usage, what's happening, right? Strategies to mitigate that usage. And I think AI is going to revolutionize all of that.
Pretty cool. For owners in other cities who may not be facing caps right now, but they could be coming, how do you prepare for that?
We have this conversation a lot. It definitely can feel overwhelming for owners and managers to look at the map of where their properties could be affected by performance standards like 97. And there are well over a dozen. There will probably be 40 or 50 over the next few years who will have legislation similar to this. And the fun part is that they're all completely different from each other.
Yeah.
There has been some standardization in some of the more recent cities and states that are pursuing this as a result of some work that the Biden administration was doing to help provide a more standardized template and approach and process to support local governments in rolling this out. But in the case of some of the early movers like Boston, New York, DC, etc., wildly different from each other. And so it definitely feels really overwhelming, and I can totally get that. I think one of the things that folks should keep in mind is what I was saying previously about key strategies that are useful, whether you are subject to these compliance requirements or not, right? Is thinking
Mhm.
about the other factors, right? Does it make sense to do, some efficiency work first, right, in the short term to reduce your operational costs? And also reduce your emissions a little bit, right? And then think about, are there partial or hybrid projects for electrification that you can do in the medium term, and then thinking about full electrification in the longer term, right? Those are all strategies that you can start exploring with a qualified energy auditor right now, right? You don't have to wait to get rules, because that's oftentimes what happens is we will get stuck in these cycles where we feel like we can't really plan anything because we're waiting for more guidance from the city officials who are working
Mhm.
on these laws. But there are a lot of these pieces that owners can get started on now. And that's what we would encourage them to do. And we'll set them up for success. And then as we start thinking about medium and longer term, and also get more information about exactly how the rules will work in a certain jurisdiction, can tailor that approach for compliance in that scenario. But I absolutely think there's a lot that owners can do right now, even if they're not 100% sure what those rules will be.
Yeah. Amanda, this has been great. As a media person, I always like to ask my guests what they're reading or listening to that would inform on this topic. And then I guess, of course, what are some of the resources that New York City owners can look to?
In terms of resources for New York City, there are a lot. So you can check out the New York City Accelerator. That's a free service that is run by the mayor's office here in New York that is designed to field all of your questions about which pieces of Local Law 97 you're subject to, what incentives are available, what service providers are out there in the market. So they're a great first stop for folks that have questions. Bright Power is also a great first stop for folks that have questions. I'm a little biased, but the accelerator is great, particularly for folks who have no idea where to start. They will really do the work of holding everyone's hand and saying, like, these are the laws that you're subject to, these are the laws that you're not subject to, because there's actually other laws in New York as well that regulate certain parts of energy use. And so that's a great place to start. The DOB also has a new website up about Local Law 97 where you can read more about their requirements. That's also a good resource. In terms of what I'm reading, this is a great question. So one of my favorite books that I've read recently about sustainability is from Dr. Katherine Hayhoe, who has done a couple of TED Talks, and she's a climate scientist, but she's not your typical researcher. She's exploring in this particular book called Saving Us how to get more faith communities interested in climate activism. And so as a progressive person of faith myself, I think it's a really interesting topic, and how can we get more people across the country really galvanized on this issue. But even for people who aren't religious, it's a really great guide on how to talk to people across what seems to be a deeper and deeper partisan divide about sustainability, about environmental justice, about climate issues, and how to connect on issues that people care about, how to translate that, which is always good, even in local environments like New York where things can get so deeply political. And so I think that there's this perception out there that everyone is so entrenched and it's just impossible to talk to people. But I think Dr. Hayhoe really shows that with the right strategy, it's absolutely possible to still engage people. And I think that we all need a little bit of hope and resetting, as we move into what the future of all of these regulations will look like. And as we try to have productive conversations about how to make them work, both in terms of achieving emissions reductions goals and also being cost effective and navigable for building owners and managers. So I think Dr. Hayhoe's book is great, and I highly, highly recommend it.
Okay, thanks. I'll have to check out the TED Talk. Well, Amanda, thank you so much, and good luck in your work.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Such a pleasure.
And thank you, listeners, for joining me on Sustainability Street. If you have any questions about this episode or suggestions for future episodes, please reach out to me at therese.fitzgerald@cpe-mhn.com. Bye for now.